Today I wanted to touch upon a very serious theme. I named it thus: Man and the Picture of the World in the Logics of the Triunity of Being. The purpose of the proposed material is to present an understanding of the picture of the world and the landmarks of a person's destiny within the framework of which it should not be excruciatingly painful for the objectivelessly spent years. There will be no anxious expectation of leaving the world as an inevitable frightening tragedy. This allows you to look confidently into the future, to realize the naturalness of the path to immortality, not at the level of biomedical technologies, but through the awareness of the Creator and the immortality of your own I, your soul. Methodological origins of false perception of the picture of the world by the modern civilization. Official academic science, forming a picture of the world, is guided by those ancient ideas that were at the basis of the scientific views of ancient Egypt. As a primary postulate, then and now, the four-unity of being is accepted. Herewith, the primary substances that make up everything that exists are matter, energy, space, and time. If you try to find the prerequisites and justifications for this postulate, you will not find them even on the ubiquitous internet. Reasoning on this theme with references to the hierarchy of Amun of the times of ancient Egypt can basically be found in the book Primary School Reader by V. Vodovozov, published in St. Petersburg in 1878. That is the whole philosophical worldview foundation of the postulate of the four-unity. No one has time for other things, for researching the foundation on which all current scientific constructions rest, starting with the theory of relativity and the nature of black holes. The situation with the four-unity is so paradoxical that it only remains in this connection to mention the appropriate aphorism of Exupéry. Reality is quite different than it actually is. Based on the four-unity, in accordance with the currently dominant scientific views, the universe came to be as the result of the Big Bang of a microscopic point 14.7 billion years ago, and has been expanding since then. Stephen Hawking, the #1 authority in the field of modern theoretical physics, was also a vivid supporter of this theory. Before the explosion, in accordance with these beliefs, there was no space, no time, no matter, no energy. They were generated by this explosion. And after their appearance, it was from them, as from primary substances, that the whole picture of the world began to unfold. Everything ingenious is simple, and should be acceptable at the level of ordinary logic and common sense. Since the Big Bang scenario contains more questions than answers, it seems to me to be false. If nothing happened, where did the point come from? If there was no space, then where was the point located? And what happened a year or an hour before the explosion was heard? And by what forces and technologies was this explosion of an unknown force organized, if there was nothing in creation? And what does the generation of time mean? A certain universal alarm clock was launched? Today, objects of the universe are instrumentally recorded, located at a distance of 45 billion light-years from the Earth. But if the explosion was 14.7 billion years ago, how did they get there? After all, the speed of their movement had to have been many times greater than the speed of light. But the speed of light is considered the maximum possible, on the basis of the self-same scientific views. In order not to drown in the absurdities of the answers to these questions, let us recall Kosma Prutkov, "Behold the root." Let's try to figure it out. What is space and time? Philosophical dictionaries, if you are looking for logical answers that are clear to you, will not help you with this. And this happens because both space and time, in reality, are not, as physicists and philosophers believe, the initial building material of creation, and do not belong to the ultimately generalizing categories of being, are not objectively existing primary philosophical categories. They are secondary, generated by human consciousness, and are simply particular measures in relation to other, truly primary, ultimately generalizing categories. Time and space are subjective parameters, formed exclusively in the psyche of man. In the process of his life, and for his convenience, man, comparing different frequency processes with each other, subjectively chooses the period of one of them as a standard. This introduces a unit of measure for time. For example, a year as the period of the revolution of the Earth around the Sun, or a day divided by hours as the period of the revolution around its axis. None of the ultimately generalizing concepts, by definition, can be expressed through something else. In this lies the essence of the ultimate generalization. And time and length, space, have a single unit of measurement. The whole universe, including you and me, is a mutually nested different frequency oscillatory wave processes. Moreover, complex processes by mathematical methods can be represented as a sum of harmonic oscillations. The main parameters of such an oscillation, strictly univocally connected between each other through the phase velocity, are its wavelength and the oscillation period. If one of the parameters is set, then the second is calculated automatically. On the basis of a subjectively chosen standard process, it's possible to reproduce both a unit of measurement of length through its wavelength and a unit of measurement of time through a period of the same standard oscillation. It becomes obvious that time and length are secondary, reducible to each other characteristics of processes taking place in the material world. Perhaps in order to cover up this non-coincidence between the primary attributes and the basic requirement for them about non-reducibility, today the standards of time and length are built in our domestic standard base, not on one oscillatory process, which would be more reasonable, but on two different ones. The standard frequency is the radiation frequency of the cesium-133 atom and the radiation wavelength of the krypton atom 86. Although it was possible to take the frequency of cesium or krypton both for the standard of time and for the standard of length, there are some technical, altogether non-principal difficulties. But furthermore, all modern physics since the time of Einstein is not even built on the fundament of objectively non-existent primary substances of space and time, but on the fact that they allegedly form a single space-time continuum or space-time fabric. True for the microworld, due to the non-convergentness between theories, they are proposed to be considered separately. And such a solid organization as the destinies of the world is forced to compromise, claiming that in the subtle quantum world, space and time, as objective categories, do not exist. Then what about the unity of the laws of the universe? Einstein's approach made it possible to fence off, for example, a real search for the physical nature of gravity by a palisade of mathematical formulas. Mathematical formulas explained everything simply. Gravity arises from the curvature of a single space-time. The erroneous postulate of the four-unity leads to the fact that when constructing a picture of the world, and when identifying physical laws, there are constant contradictions between theory and experimental data. It is known that without solving a general question, you will regularly stumble upon it when solving any particular question, which is what happens in modern physics. The introduction by Einstein and the unconditional acceptance by the official science of the special theory of relativity turned out to be incompatible with the centuries-old theory of the ether. Since then, Einstein's strict requirement that the existence of the ether should be forgotten and never remembered in the future has been fulfilled. This even sounds more like a political mandate. This leads to a distorted perception of the physical picture of the world. Let us recall the position of B.I. Mendeleev. The gravity problem and the tasks of the entire energy sector cannot be imagined to be really resolved without a real understanding of the ether as a global medium that transfers energy over distances. What are space and time made of? This question is qualified as the greatest mystery of the universe by the leading physicist of the Stanford Institute for Theoretical Physics, Aaron Wall. Really listen to this question. What are space and time made of? This is what the world's best physicists are puzzling over. In reality, the answer to this question cannot be found in principle. Two mathematical abstractions existing only in human consciousness were combined together, and after that, it is necessary to find the initial building material from which this mythical, not existing in nature abstraction is built. Energy is not the primary attribute of being. This is also a secondary, particular category, accompanying the process of transformation of matter, but nothing more. For example, coal, when burned, can turn into gas, and ice, when heated, into water, and then into steam. In the first case, heat energy will be released. The second will require energy from an external source. But these energetic processes are secondary in relation to the transformations of matter. They carry information about the ongoing changes. Of the four primary attributes, only one is correctly postulated: matter. So modern physics should remember Kosma Prudkov, who argued that small causes entail big consequences. A principally different picture of the world is formed on a different postulate about the ultimately generalizing categories of creation. Since ancient times, in different civilizational communities, including the hierarchy of Aton, the same ancient Egypt, the understandings about the triunity of being were adopted. In accordance with this postulate, the initial primary philosophical categories, matter, information, and measure, were recognized. Moreover, they have never been considered separately from each other. Being was perceived as a process, a triunity: matter, information, measure. Matter is something that is capable of impacting something similar to it, changing its state and image. In this case, matter is understood as substance in solid, liquid, gaseous state, plasma, elementary particles, fields, the physical vacuum that absorbs and gives birth to elementary particles from nothing. The physical vacuum is objectively not a void, but one of the varieties of matter. Information is an objectively existing, but not material something, however interconnected with the material object and characterizing it in full. Information always accompanies matter. In creation, there can exist no abstract matter that cannot be characterized by information: color, size, internal structure, physical properties, and so on. There is no thing without an image. Any thing is then a thing when you can characterize it informationally. In the current civilization, the idea of this ultimately generalizing concept is hidden. It is generalizing and inseparable from the group of such concepts as spirit, energy, force, governing principle. Information about really existing things and material objects cannot arise by itself, without the original material carrier. These two categories cannot be reflected in our senses and exist one without the other, representing a real dialectical unity of matter and information as two sides of one and the same coin. Measure is a predetermined by God multi-measured matrix of possible states of matter storing information about the past and about an inherently predetermined matrix of possible changes of this state in the future. That is, in essence, about the cause-effect conditionalities of all flowing in creation processes. The greatest difficulties and discrepancies arise in the interpretation of the third attribute of being, measure. For a deeper understanding of this problematics, let us turn to one of the scriptures, the Quran. In Surah 25:2 of the Quran, in our opinion, information about the triunity of being is given in ultimately generalized terms. Here is a corresponding excerpt in 3 variants of translation in order to reduce the perceptual error in the process of translation. The text of the translation is always subjective. It reflects not only the original meaning, but also the worldview of the translator himself. So, the Quran, Surah 25:2, criterion. He has created everything and determined its proper measure, in the translation by Abdul Manan Omar. He created everything, and so he determined it in exact determination, in the translation by Dr. Gali. He hath created everything, and hath meted out for it a measure, translation by Muhammad Pickthall. Not a literal translation, but the transfer of the meaning of the Quran about the picture of the creation of the world, compiling these 3 variants, on the basis of the worldview of the Triunity, can be represented as follows. God created everything and every being that exists in creation, and bestowed everything its due, predetermined by Him, measure. Moreover, in this act of creation, it is matter, information, and measure that act as the primary attributes of being. In the consciousness of the healthy thinking, it is difficult to form a holistic picture of the world on the basis of the four-unity and the Big Bang theory as the ancestor of our universe. It looks much more logical on the basis of the cosmogonic theories of antiquity, which preceded the postulation of the four-unitedness of being. Then it was believed that the universe arises from the primary ether. It was called the waters of eternity, and at the end of any cycle, each atom disintegrates into primary particles of the water of eternity. In the logics of the triunity, man identifies the ether with the physical vacuum. This is not a void. It is precisely it that, in the hands of the Creator, is the initial building material for the manifested material world. The theory of the ether was the basis for the research of most of the geniuses of mankind, from Lomonosov to Lenin and Tsiolkovsky. Tesla, who is not understood to this day, and who refused the Nobel Prize, argued that electric current is a stream of ether. He also wrote work about gravity as the force of pressure of the world ether. His catchphrase is also known: "You are wrong, Mr. Einstein, the ether exists." He believed that the ether is electrically neutral, does not interact with the material world, but is its initial building material. Ether is represented in the works of Karamzin, Pushkin, Lermontov. By the way, at the first stage of his scientific activity, Einstein, who argued that in the absence of the transmitting medium ether, it was impossible to explain the propagation of electromagnetic waves, was also an active supporter of the theory of the ether. Contrary to the position of Einstein, who introduced a ban on the mention of the ether, V.I. Lenin, in 1907 in his work Materialism and Empirio-Criticism, writes about the transformation of weightless ether into weighty matter, and vice versa. This hypothesis is capable of shedding light on all the unsolvable problems of modern cosmogonic physics. It is only necessary to supplement this technology of circulation in the system ether-matter-ether by the circumstance that such transitions are inevitably accompanied by powerful energetic processes. We have mentioned the release of energy when converting solid coal to gas. For this, the high temperature required to start the reaction must be set. It can be assumed that the energy released by the sun is connected with the process of formation of discharged atoms of the real material world from the ether flows. The temperature of the course of such a reaction in the solar corona exceeds 1,000,000 degrees. To start up an analog of a solar reactor, to all appearances, comparable temperature conditions are needed. In this logic, the sun, and not the Big Bang, is the generator of everything existing in the solar system. It can be assumed that the core of the Earth and its mantle are analogous to a solar reactor, which produces the crust of the Earth, atoms of hydrogen and oxygen combined into water molecules, and minerals from the streams of ether. The magnetic lines of force from the iron-nickel Earth core, which are depicted as entering and leaving the poles of the Earth. This is nothing more than the trajectories of the flow of ether, which is transformed into the matter of the entire terrestrial spectrum of the periodic table. Such a hypothesis is capable of explaining much which today is inexplicable. In particular, the generation of matter from the ether inside the Earth explains the phenomenon of a constant increase in its diameter and weight, divergence of continents, and a decrease in the connected with it speed of revolution around its axis. It is known that if we simulate the globe and reduce it by 55 to 60%, then all continents will precisely fold into a single original mosaic. This hypothesis also removes other now inexplicable phenomena. Could the Ekibastos coal basin, with a bedding thickness of up to 200 meters, emerge by chance from biological terrestrial waste? Seams of coal of such thickness cry out that there was no Carboniferous period in geological history. In order to obtain them, it's necessary to compress and chemically modify a layer of plant organic matter several kilometers thick. And what is seen in coal seams, like plant leaves, carbon analogues of ice patterns on windows, which should be remembered by those whose childhood fell on the era of stove heating. The same applies to rock salt deposits. They are not at all the result of the drying up of ancient salt oceans. The biggest mystery of the universe, in the field of the modern physics of the four unitedness, is the so-called black holes, in the zone of which matter turns into nothing, and space and time disappear. On a popular level, this is explained by such a powerful deflection of the space-time fabric that it turns into a funnel into which everything goes. Hawking's research is recognized as the most significant in this area. He studied the possibilities of the reverse process, when everything spills out from the funnel. Also known are his studies of the radiation of black holes, which is called Hawking radiation. In the logics of the four-unity and of the prohibition of the ether hypothesis, for the elimination of the contradictions between quantum mechanics and the theory of relativity, string theory is being developed today. But it's only valid for 10-dimensional space. From the perspective of the triunity, with the rejection of space and time as objectively existing substances, everything looks much simpler, more holistic, and logical. If on the sun and in the central part of the Earth, dense streams of ether, burning with the release of a huge amount of energy, turn into light-sparse atoms, then in a black hole, matter that has spent the technological period laid down by the Creator returns to the ether. This process is accompanied by the absorption of energy and matter from the cosmos. This is precisely why, in the universe, there is an ordering of zones with a sharp contrast of temperatures, which would be impossible in the case of a chaotic explosion. There is one more phenomenon that is controversial in modern physics. In 1913, the French mathematician Élie Cartan pointed out the possibility of the existence of a physical field called torsion, and formed by the torsion of the ether. Torsion fields arise around any rotating body, an atom, a flywheel of machines, a planet, and are also generated by various kinds of geometric shapes and human thoughts. Negative or positive thoughts, being informationally algorithmically different, modulate the properties of the torsion field in different ways. According to many scientists, torsion radiation is the fifth fundamental physical field. Modern physics either denies the presence of torsion fields or considers this conception as possible, but not proven. Although against the background of the currently developed string theory for 10-dimensional space, this hypothesis looks frankly more logical and preferable. The theory of torsion fields has become widely known, thanks to the scientists of the Russian Academy of Natural Sciences, Shipov and Efimov. Torsion fields, in their opinion, do not possess energy and do not transmit it. They are pure carriers of information. Although there is another point of view that they are full of energy, but these fields are energetically isolated from the rest of matter. This is akin to connecting the terminals of an electric consumer to the insulation of the wire rather than to the wires themselves. By virtue of this circumstance, the intensity of torsion fields does not depend on the distance from its source and has an exceptional penetrating ability in any natural environment. Efimov asserted that torsion fields, including human thoughts, permeate the entire physical world, causing the instantaneous interconnection of all that exists. Now let's move on to the second question. It is named as follows: what is man? And three basic questions of being. The task of developing a theory of everything in physics, which Stephen Hawking was engaged in, he called the book The Theory of Everything, did not take into account the need for its harmony, or at least an indirect interconnection with the inner world of man himself. Indeed, in a person endowed with the image and possible likeness of God, through consciousness and reason, through nervousness and spirituality, the general plan of the Creator is reflected. One of the brightest Russian astrophysicists, V.F. Schwarzman, was convinced that cognition of the external, material world is an immeasurably simpler task than cognition of the inner, psychic world of man, the spiritual and ethical world. The technological age will soon end. Humanity will understand that it has lost its way. And finally, it will completely occupy itself with the soul, in the broad sense of this word. The global civilizational crisis that we are experiencing testifies to the fact that in the name of preserving the biological species Homo sapiens, it is time to heed this wise advice. As the subjects of being, God, the Creator and Almighty, as a supramundane reality, and the created by Him creation are usually considered. Creation is unlimited, both in the direction of the macro and micro dimensions. The electron is as inexhaustible as the universe. Today, a person is able to move technologically towards microprocessors up to the level of nanometers, that is, up to 10 to the minus 9th power of a meter. Up to 10 to the power minus 25 degrees, the person penetrates at the level of theoretical reasoning and development. These dimensions cover the level of being of electrons, atoms, molecules. The characteristic sizes of the ether particles, according to some assumptions, have dimensions at the level of 10 to the minus 100th power. This is such a colossal difference with the size of an electron that it is impossible to scale it in the form of some kind of model in human consciousness. The dimensions of the ether particles are so small that it freely penetrates into any matter, filling with itself, including intraatomic and intraelectronic space. And there is something to fill. After all, the internal structure of an atom is in essence emptiness. The nucleus, in which practically all the mass of an atom is concentrated, occupies 1/1,000,000th of its volume. In order to scale an atom into sizes that are understandable for us, imagine a sphere from an electronic virtual cloud with the diameter of a football field, and place a nucleus in the center of this sphere, it will be the size of a pea. So the possibilities of penetration of the ether, taking into account its dimensionality, into the material world, into interatomic space, are practically unlimited. All of us and the whole world are saturated with ether. There are also such assumptions that the Creator has technologies for creating cells, not from chemical elements, not from atoms and molecules, but from ether. In this case, however, etheric creatures, in particular the human soul, can be formed from such cells. A data bank about a person's personality, a kind of electronic copy of it, is formed in the course of his life online. The information about the place of storage of this information is given in the Quranic hadith from Abu Huraira, which narrates the words of the Prophet Muhammad. This data bank is a special flash drive bone, which plays the role of an electronic information storage device. This bone is only part of the human body that does not decompose in the ground and does not burn in fire. During my meeting with Sai Baba, he demonstrated his ability to read this information about each of the visitors from their conventional flash drives with a high degree of reliability. He gave me information from the lives of a dozen people whom he saw for the first time. All processes and energy informational entities in the interval of dimensions between electron and ether we call the subtle world, since we are not able to reveal them by instrumental methods. But these are our problems, and creation, regardless of us, remains united and holistic. The waves of this interval of dimensions are responsible for the formation and transmission of thoughts, emotions, convictions, beliefs, feelings, including the most important divine feeling, the feeling of love. All processes occurring in a cell are similar to those in a megalopolis. Moreover, they are more complex and better thought out and organized. A person, as a supersystem, consists of cells, the number of which reaches 100 trillion. But each of them in its own way is intelligent. They interact with each other. On the basis of informational interaction with brothers, there are signals about emerging problems. They work as an integrity for common interests. In the organism, abnormal cells constantly appear, of an oncological directionality, oriented only on their own dominance. Against them, as well as against other dangers for the organism, aliens, viruses, foreign cells, the fight for their destruction is led by the immune system, special T cells and large devourers, macrophages dismembering foreigners into small fragments. Thanks to this, the organism develops successfully. Human society can also be imagined as a supersystem, consisting of 7.7 billion people, sui generis cells, of a single organism of earthly civilization. These conditioned cells are also endowed with reason, the ability to communicate and interact with each other. True, the modern world has improved the given to us by God biofield, subordinal interaction, with mobile connections. In terms of its scale, the task of organizing and governing the cells of the human organism is 4 orders of magnitude more complex than the rational organization of the cells of society. However, we are noticeably worse at coping with this task. The structure of ciliates and galaxies is identical in the number of parameters. The keys to the knowledge of both the macrocosm and the world of subtle matters lie in the knowledge of the world around us. After all, according to the thought of Saint Gregory Palamas, God made all the visible world as a mirror of heavenly things, so that by contemplating it spiritually, we might attain to them, as by a marvelous ladder. Based on this, we can conclude that the cognition of one's own personality is the technology of cognition of the Creator. The question of the meaning of life was on the agenda and has been discussed throughout the entire existence of mankind. It was not ignored by any of the famous philosophers. The answers were formed to a greater extent subjectively, proceeding from the idea that rallied this or that era, from the tasks that were faced by its masters. The Age of Aquarius, which started in the 21st century, forming qualitatively new knowledge about the system, man-society creation, makes it possible to talk about the meaning of life on a principally new, non-conjunctural basis. This knowledge has already become the property of the noosphere, although it has not entered the systems of science and education by force of their inertiality. This makes it possible to work on this problem on a methodologically new basis, on the basis of the awareness of God, the Creator and Almighty. For in the worldview of godlessness, in the absence of understanding of God's design in relation to the mission of man, any answers to the question of the meaning of life look naively primitive. At one time, Lev Nikolaevich Tolstoy, entering the zone of his spiritual revolution and searches for God, spoke about it this way: the only meaning of a person's life is to improve his immortal foundation. All other forms of activity are meaningless in their essence, due to the inevitability of death. Our material is dedicated exactly to what is connected with this immortal basis, place, and mission of man in the universe. We rely on the knowledge of the researchers of the new era, which are already represented in its egregor. Today this egregor has support only at the level of social initiative, and its knowledge, for obvious reasons, at the given stage, cannot be recognized by science. There is nothing offensive or unusual in this. This has been the case at all times, starting with Copernicus and G. Bruno, especially when it comes to a fundamental revision of scientific dogmas. Precisely on this, on the formation of a new civilizational and scientific paradigm, the egregor of the Aquarian era is oriented. Only in the dialectical unity of conservatism and stability, with search and variability, can the evolutionary development of society, not accompanied by shocks and revolutionary upheavals, be ensured. A powerful state-supported egregor of an operating scientific corporation will naturally, by all available means, protect itself and those closed on it. The positive function of ensuring the stability of society is performed by the Church. Basic religion and belief must be preserved as a unifying basis until social consciousness itself reaches a higher level. If we learn to hear each other, find the golden mean between stability and variability, enter into harmony with a new space, then we have the prospect of reaching a new quality, forming an egregor on the basis of the principles of likeness with the Creator. Questions about the picture of the world, about the objectives of development of society, are interconnected with three fundamental questions of being. 1. What is man? 2. Is there God, Creator and Almighty? 3. Is there life after death? Man, in our view, is the triunity of body, spirit, and soul. The body is not I. It is a temple for the spirit and soul. When we pronounce the innermost I, then this should be understood as the soul. Upon completion of the earthly incarnation, she, as an energy informational entity, returns to the world of subtle matters. At the same time, the earth fulfills the mission of an educational complex for the retraining of souls, for subsequent work on the arrangement of that part of the universe that is fixed to the earth. The soul, already incarnated in the body shell earlier, is given to a person from God in the process of intrauterine development, as the structure of the brain is formed, 4 to 6 months from conception. The soul spiritualizes a person from the moment of birth. She, being a fragment of the supramundane reality, provides an informational channel for the perception of the providence of God. During her stay in the body, the soul gains additional experience, and from the inside, realizes life in its material forms. The main task of man and his spirit is, on the basis of his own will and the given to him freedom of choice, to govern his own body, heeding the prompts of the soul. However, in most cases, a different interaction scheme is implemented. The body imposes its position on the spirit and governs it. Let's lie in, let's not exercise, and so on. The second danger lies in the fact that the effective perception of the prompts of the soul is impossible in the conditions of endless flickering of thoughts about the problems of the past and the future. My thoughts, my galloping horses. Prompts come in a state of silence of the mind, which no one ever teaches us. We often don't understand the meaning of meditations. We don't know how to enter the state of here and now. How can one not recall Pushkin's House in Kolomna? Then blessed is he who keeps his tongue from jangling, and holds his thought well tethered to its stake, who silences by drugging or by strangling within his heart the sudden hissing snake. The question of whether God is the Creator and Almighty is considered by the majority from the standpoint of faith. Some believe that God is, some in the same way believe that God is not. In reality, this question is not in its essence a matter of faith. Practice is the criterion of truth. To those who believe God, He gives confirmation of His existence in a strictly individual, unrepeatable form. He answers the prayer of the believer and the one who lives according to Sovest. An observant person clearly notices and records changes in the statistics of accidents happening to him with a previous appeal to God. It is necessary to clearly distinguish between the concepts of faith in God and faith towards God. The mission of uniting all confessions into a single for all faith towards God could be undertaken by our domestic orthodoxy. Our material is intended so that the perceiver can confidently take the first step in the process of entering the stream of the providence of God. And this process begins with the initial hypothetical assumption about the being of God as an objective givenness at the level of faith. And only after that, according to your faith, can you receive direct confirmation of the being of God through prayers and concrete life practice. The best way to know the artist is through the canvas. At one time, M.V. Lomonosov emphasized that nature is, in a sense, the gospel of God, proclaiming loudly His power and greatness. The entire creation, the animal world, are fantastically divinely arranged on the basis of such unique programs that it is simply not realistic to explain this greatness and harmony in the absence of the creator programmer and Almighty. Here are some truly divine features of everything on earth. 2 or 3 examples from the living world. Did you know that the garden spider, which we do not notice, is essentially a unique mini-robot, which includes a chemical production, a knitting machine, a design bureau, and a computer with sophisticated software? It produces 5 types of liquid, adhesive, a mixture that instantly solidifies in the air, with predetermined properties, taking into account the task at hand and weather conditions, excretes from a number of suitable barrel pipes. Their total number is 600, and is woven into a rope of a set design. Humanity has no analogues for the creation of such ropes. The device of the web is made in accordance with a clearly verified project for the production of work, in relation to a concrete space with a set in advance slope, where the spider moves only along special threads, otherwise he himself would become entangled in his own web. That is, the builder himself would be the first victim of his own project. Blind atta ants have unique programs of their own organization when creating their own megalopolises, an instant, contentful informational communication with each other. And their queen ant is capable of teleporting from one closed concrete chamber to another. The caterpillar, before turning into a butterfly, becomes a saline solution, from which, according to a unique program, this miracle project is formed. Water is a unique phenomenon of nature. in violation of all the laws of physics for liquid media. It has such properties that fall out of the general range that their absence would make life on Earth impossible. The composition of the atmospheric gas is such that it provides a greenhouse effect. Thanks to this, the average daily temperature on Earth rises from -23 degrees to a comfortable +15. The core of iron and nickel located inside the planet forms a magnetic field that serves as a protective dome against cosmic radiation, which is deadly for humans. The mass of the Earth is selected as calculated. Its decrease would lead to the loss of the atmosphere, and its increase would lead to the impossibility of the functioning of the human body. The distance from the Sun to the Earth, on average about 150 million kilometers, is set with amazing accuracy. Its change in units of percent would lead to either scorched Earth or icing. The tilt of the rotation axis of the Earth relative to the plane of its orbit is 23 degrees, and the Moon stabilizes all processes in its orbit. It is these parameters that provide comfortable climatic conditions, the change of seasons. Otherwise, temperature fluctuations would reach the limits from -50 to +100 degrees. The theoretical physicist from the University of Bonn, Silas Bean, thinks that it's quite possible that we live in a universe modeled by a more highly developed civilization. Such is the position of the physicist. Nick Bostrom, professor of philosophy at Oxford University, also reflects on this. Despite the difference between such numerous views, they all suppose, in essence, the existence of God, the Creator and Almighty, a certain supramundane, higher reality that has generated and supports the development of life on Earth. To summarize all that has been said, we must admit that the Creator created both man and the unique cosmic ship called Earth. It is on it that we travel through outer space. Such a grandiose project, in the epicenter of which there is man as the successor of God on Earth, of course, has a divine plan regarding the objectives and meaning of his life. This approach does not contradict the biblical stories of the book of Genesis about the creation of the world. The only thing that we must keep in mind is that the identification of the biblical day with the day of our present-day understanding is not permissible. We are talking about a cosmogonic, galactic day. On the first day, when there was light, there was no Earth, and there could not be day as a unit of time measurement linked to the period of its revolution around its axis. This is a day of a fundamentally different scale. Suffice it to say that one orbital cycle of the solar system in our galaxy is 185 million years, and galaxies in the universe, as we have noted, is 1,200 billion years. Next section, life after death. The question of life after death is now almost the most discussed. A large number of books have been published on this thematics, and claims for scientific evidence of the life and immortality of the soul are put in some of them directly on the cover. Gonzalez Whippler, Clark, Danilova, Miller, Eben, etc. The number of people who return to life after clinical death on a planetary scale has reached almost 13 million. This is connected with the improvement of resuscitation and revitalization technologies. Surprisingly, the vast majority of these people talk about similar experiences in the process of their short-term death. Some of them can tell about what was happening at that time in the surrounding space, both near and at any distance. The first scientific explanation for these processes was tried in his time by Tsiolkovsky. In his opinion, physical death does not mean the end of life. In his theory, souls are represented as indivisible compounds. Saying goodbye to perishable bodies, they do not disappear, but continue life in the universe. Proofs were not presented by him, and they are hardly possible in principle. Apparently, God has a measure for the limits of cognition of being from the earthly level. All the existing points of view about life after death are impossible to prove or disprove. Therefore, building my own subjective picture on this score, I rely on happenings of chance that led me to this problematics. Two of my acquaintances went through a state of clinical death, and I had the opportunity to talk with them in detail. I also have some personal experience. My wife is able to see something on the subtle plane. One of our acquaintances is professionally engaged in lucid dreaming. Sleep technology and reincarnation when the soul leaves the body seem to have a lot in common. In 2004, in Novosibirsk, I was presented with two books with commemorative inscriptions, which I reread today with different eyes. These are the books by Sviatoslav Petrovich Polyakov, The Reasoning Life of the Universe and The Path of Awareness of Eternity. Then, after reading them, I had a detailed conversation with him. I was surprised by the technologies by which this information, far from his field of activity, came to him, a doctor of technical sciences, a professor. A little later, I came into contact with his thematics through the books of Michael Newton, Journey of the Souls, Destiny of Souls, Life Between Lives. In adulthood, into which I entered, everyone approaches a fork with two roads. The first variant is further movement on the autopilot of earthly problems. On this path comes fatigue, routine, meaningless everydayness, with anxious expectation of leaving for the next world as an inevitable, frightening tragedy. But no grief can be as great as the fear of it. I managed to avoid this grief and this fear, thanks to the ideas about the picture of the world in the holistic logics of the Triunity. Understanding of this fact that in creation, processes of the subtle, ethereal world form the landmarks of the life path connected with the immortality of the soul. In this logics, even the most severe tests, with the inner feeling of one's own previousness, can be viewed not as a punishment, but as life lessons and exams necessary for strengthening and improving the soul. Knowledge of the age of Aquarius opens opportunities for the optimistic look at the forthcoming reincarnation of each of us. It should be considered as a quantum leap, the transition of the soul from the material world to the world of subtle matters, after a successful or less successful business trip in essence. Is it appropriate to grieve when a butterfly leaves the cocoon that has served it? We must realize the naturalness of the path to immortality, not at the level of medical technologies, but through the realization of the Creator on the basis of new ideas about man, his soul, and about creation. In the beliefs of many countries and peoples, the worldview perception of the fact of leaving earthly life is radically different from ours. These are countries of a fundamentally different worldview, with the wisest, by the way, signs of a biogenic civilization. I saw this on the island of Bali. According to the beliefs of the Balinese, the natural state of man is the fusion of the spirit of man with nature, and earthly life is something like a punishment. Apparently, in order to mitigate this punishment in Bali, in particular, it is forbidden by law to build a house higher than a palm tree. A person somehow has to remain closer to nature. Death is perceived as a release from imprisonment. Therefore, a holiday is held in its honor. Many cheerful relatives and neighbors gather for the funeral. 50 people. This is the most modest funeral. The inhabitants of Ghana accept death no less joyfully. The funeral there can be mistaken for a rock concert. A real show with music and dancing is held on the occasion of the funeral in Taiwan as well. Imagine that our mind, a regenerating soul at the moment of its egressing from the body, is taken in the jaws of a cat. The quality of a person's life will be significantly different depending on whether he perceives himself in this new quality as a kitten falling under the care of his beloved mother, or a mouse deserving of punishment. The most dangerous thing to health and well-being is living under the yoke of fear. In the view of the Triunity, creation, development and collapse of solar systems, galaxies, are cyclical, continuously under the guidance of the Creator and Almighty. This is creative, careful, systematic work that cannot be replaced by big bangs. According to Polyakov, reasoning life of the universe, the souls of all living beings of the earth have practice in the material world as an army of future developers and creators of space projects in the part of the universe assigned to the earth. The first army of celestials, working with the transportation of atoms and molecules to the assembly sites, in his view, consists of souls of extremely small and innumerable units. The second army, the souls of a large animal world, are guardians and organizers of work at the assembly sites. Different souls have different functions. Indeed, when you see the fantastic uniqueness of the programs we have noted, for example, spiders or ants or bees, you involuntarily ask yourself about their divine purpose. These two armies work, in his opinion, according to strict programs inherent in their memory, and are devoid of initiative. For them, freedom of will and thinking are optional or even superfluous, although with reasoning creativity they can advance into the third army. And this third army of celestials, which can think and control the first two armies, are the souls of people. For the third army, there are very different jobs up to the level of creator. Those who in earthly life do not pass the test will perform work of the level of the souls of the biological entities of the first two armies. The cosmic mind carries out the training of human souls, controls and directs the work of all three armies. I would not like to give any evaluations of this hypothetical model of Polyakov. I will only note an interesting little-known detail. The Quran provides indirect evidence of the presence of sui generis souls in the animal kingdom, and Polyakov also adheres to these positions, qualitatively isolating them by the presence, in contrast to humans, of a strict program. Here is an excerpt from the Quran in this regard. Surah 35:45. If God took mankind to task by that which they deserve, he would not leave a living creature on the surface of the earth, but he reprieveth them unto an appointed term. It is obvious that the Quran proceeds from the fact that the souls of a part of sinners are preserved, but they fall out of humanity into the animal world in subsequent incarnations. This is the only way to understand why in this verse the ability to ruthlessly exact from people for their deeds is associated with the extermination of the entire animal world. The Bible in the book of Genesis 1:20-1:24 also speaks of souls in relation to any living life on earth, and not only in relation to man. If you put the future of your soul in the foreground in your vector of objectives, then this radically changes the objectives and meanings of life. But at the same time, you need to identify possible variants for the predestination of your soul, its mission. Some analogies can be found in Michael Newton's works. Of interest to me was the description of the mission of soul harmonizers. They are incarnated into communicative personalities, developing in various spheres of social life. They aren't healers in the traditional sense of the word. They function on a social scale. They are skilled linguists with the ability to phrase words in vibrational terms that deeply touch people. It is their mission to help humanity in a direct physical way. They report on human trends that they feel require special attention. There is a common theme I hear among harmonizer souls. They wish to give people the means to help themselves where they can, but they are not the conscience of human beings, and they don't interfere with our free will. The level that the soul can reach after reincarnation is not connected with the presence of wealth, But with spirituality, with the amount of radiant energy, the energy of love and light, accumulated in earthly life and stored in its caches. It is the amount of energy accumulated by the soul that determines the high or low trajectory of its transition to the world of subtle matters. Only this property, and not a Mercedes or a yacht, can be taken with you, and only it can help the soul enter this or that orbit. So the views on the structure of creation and the study of the phenomenon of man himself are inextricably linked, and it's they that determine the guidelines, objectives, and meanings of a person's life. Clarity in one of these areas is impossible without adequate clarity in the other. It is no coincidence that Immanuel Kant put them in one line. Two things awe me most, the starry sky above and the moral law within me. Man has penetrated the starry sky instrumentally at a distance of 10 to the 22nd power of a meter. We have seen hundreds of billions of stars in our galaxy, hundreds of billions of galaxies in the universe. But the penetration into the microcosm of our unravious law, to the levels of 10 to the minus 100th power of a meter, is just as boundless. In man, through his body and soul, the infinities of both the macro and micro world are connected. This fact, sooner or later, inevitably leads us to the realization of our own I as a soul. And if the awareness of the soul and its mission does not come after reincarnation, but during earthly life, then a person on earth lives not so much with his body as with the present and future of his soul, improving his immortal foundation, as Leo Tolstoy once believed. Only in this scenario will he reap a meaningful destiny filled with the happiness of eternity. Let us logically and skillfully construct each one his own picture of the world, so that on the hypothesis about the mission and predestination of his soul, we form the objectives and meanings of our eternal life. In this case, we really will not have excruciating pain from objectivelessly spent years. I wish you awareness in spirit, love and dobro. Be happy.